Well, good evening. Hi, everyone. It's great to be with you. It's Andrew Bridgewater live from Larnaca in Cyprus. And if you can hear me, could you just say, yes, I can hear you, just to make sure my sound is definitely getting through, please. So if you just put that in the chat bar, that will be really helpful. So for the next 45 minutes or so, I'm going to share some really powerful information with you. And I'm also going to answer questions that we've got from people who are on the call with me. And it feels very special for me to be delivering this webinar from Cyprus, because as you'll find out, Cyprus was a very important part of my story of severe stress and recovery from severe stress, depression. And all of that happened in 2006, and I'll say more about that as we go on. And I'm just going to put my webcam on so you can actually see me. It's 26 degrees where I am at the moment, so it's very warm. I've got a fan on in the background just to try and keep me cool. But please do ask questions, put questions in the chat there and comments as well as we go through, and I'll respond as we go to the comments that you're raising. So I'm just going to forward the presentation on to the next slide, and we'll make a start. So this session is designed to give you a different look at something called resilience. Resilience is a word that's bandied around a lot these days, particularly in the corporate world. We're going to have a look at a definition of resilience, which I think is a very useful one. I'm going to give you a different perspective on it and share my personal story around resilience in dealing with stress. And I think when you hear that story, you realize why I'm doing what I'm doing here. And as part of the session, I'm going to share some powerful tips for dealing with stress. And I'll take your questions first of all as we go, and also particularly focus on those at the end of the session. So if you're listening live, please get a pencil and paper, make some notes, and get ready as to interact with them. So this concept of resilience, as I say, has been talked about a lot, more and more in work circles. And here's a definition that I came across from the Harvard Business Review in January 2015. To recover from setbacks, adapt well to change, and keep going in the face of adversity. Seems like a really good definition to me, because life is an up and down experience. Not everything in life will go well, and I think I got into a bit of a trap earlier in my life when I tended to think that for me to feel good, for me to feel happy, my life circumstances had to be going well. And I think a lot of us feel that. You know, we have this belief that it's our circumstances that dictate how we feel. But that's not the case. And there's some sort of fundamental reevaluation of that going on for me and a lot of other people. I'm going to share where that's come from. So as well as recovering from setbacks, it's adapting well to change and keeping going in the face of adversity. Because as Sid Banks was fond of saying, life is a contact sport, and stuff will happen in life, and it's how you deal with it that is going to dictate the quality of your life, the happiness of your life, not what actually happens. And I think my story will illustrate that very clearly, based on, as I say, personal experience. So I've got a couple of questions for you. What if you already have access to all the resilience you'll ever need? What if you already have access to all the resilience you ever need? Well, I believe you do. And when you know that for sure, when you know that as a truth, it really does change your life, because you no longer have to fear difficult life circumstances. And let's face it, none of us can predict what might happen in life, ranging from loss of a job or livelihood to the death of a loved one to challenging economic circumstances. All sorts of things can happen in life. And yes, we'll feel sad, we might feel disrupted for a while, but we don't need to allow those circumstances to put us into deep, prolonged stress, which can easily tip into depression and anxiety. Because do you realize that none of your thinking is real? Do you realize that none of your thinking is real? Now, I've posted that question a few times in live talks that I've given with groups of people. And when I tend to pose that question, I give them a practical exercise to do. Now, I'm not going to do that live on this webinar now, because I think the people on it will probably run for their lives and leave me talking to myself. So let me just explain the practical exercise that I've used before. When I was giving a talk similar to this recently, it was actually at my old school, which is Shakespeare School in Stratford-upon-Avon. And I was giving a talk in the room where Shakespeare learned to read and write several hundred years ago. And addressing the old Edwardians, as they're called, I said, okay, do you realise that none of your thinking is real? I'm going to illustrate that now. So if there's a yellow post-it slip under your chair, I'd like you to come up and share a humorous anecdote about a memorable experience you had at school. Now, remember that the headmaster's sitting in the audience. The average age is probably somewhere between 70 and 80 of the audience, about 60 people. And the experience is quite fascinating. So they rummaged around under their chairs. And of course, I was kidding. I hadn't actually put anything under the chairs. What I'd actually done was just set this up as a little kind of vignette, if you like. And what was interesting was that everybody had a slightly different reaction to that question, or to the situation that I posed. Do you want to come up and share your most humorous experience of being at the school? And really, this illustrated a point that Shakespeare makes in Hamlet. It's actually scene 2. He says that nothing is good or bad, only thinking makes it so. And when you realize that, you realize that you are living in a virtual reality of your own creation. And that virtual reality is created through your personal thinking, not directly from the circumstances or situations that you're experiencing in life. And when you appreciate that, when you realize that, it is fundamentally life-changing. So I'd urge you just to kind of reflect on that, just to think about that for a moment. The point about this is that all of this has come from my personal story of negative stress. So, as I say, being out in Cyprus right now is very poignant to me, because back in 2005, 2006, I bought the property that I'm sitting in at the moment in Cyprus. Now, I bought it in a period of very a rising market, a very positive market. It had been going on in a positive fashion for many, many years. Cyprus was just about to go into the euro. And within a few short months of finalising the purchase of this property, the prices of property in Cyprus plummeted quite significantly, about 25%, which left me with negative equity, a property I couldn't afford to pay for. Neither could I rent it because the market was saturated over here. And what actually happened was I got myself into a deep period of stress as a result of literally non-stop negative thinking, day and night, 24 hours a day, for about 4 months. And that resulted in me being hospitalized for 5 weeks with something called psychotic depression. And I'll say a little bit more about the psychotic bit later on, because it's the key link, one of the key links that I've made to what we call the 3 principles, this understanding of how we're creating our experience of life. So as well as being hospitalized for 5 weeks for my own safety, I felt not only very stressed, depressed, I actually felt quite suicidal. And it's crazy to think that one thought could have tipped me over the edge, one more thought, one more opportunity, and I might not be here. I then spent 18 months on antidepressant medication. One of the consequences of that was that I put on 50 pounds or 3.5 stone in weight. And that's a picture of me struggling up a mountain in Ireland in 2007. So this is about 12 months after the episode of depression, but I was saying that the antidepressants were coursing through my veins. I felt overweight, sluggish, and I just felt very unhappy, despite the fact that I'd come out of hospital. The antidepressants were kind of masking the symptoms, but weren't dealing with the underlying causes. So something happened, and there was a momentary transformation. I can remember that the moment everything started to shift for me was when I'd actually got into a lift in London. By this time, in 2007, I was working a corporate training job, quite stressful, travel all over Europe. And in this lift I got into at the end of a busy day's training, there was a 4-way mirror. And I caught a look at myself, looking at, like I did in the previous picture. At 44 years of age, I was stressed, overweight, unhealthy, and I just thought, what's going to become of me? And I was still feeling quite depressed despite being on medication. I thought, right, this has to change. I made a decision at that point, and the root of the word decision is to cut oneself off from any other possibility. And when you make a committed decision, it's amazing what can happen. So within a few months, I came off medication. Now, if anybody listening to this who is on medication for stress, depression, or anxiety, or anything else for that matter, please don't take matters into your own hands without the advice and support of your practitioner, general practitioner, doctor, or specialist who's prescribed that medication. I came off the medication and lost the weight by making some simple lifestyle changes, the headlines of which I'm going to share with you as part of this session. But more significantly than losing the weight was I found myself enjoying energy, vitality, and well-being that I hadn't enjoyed since my mid-20s. And remember that I was late 40s by this point. But also, a very, very positive side effect was that I was able to deal with a much higher level of stress than I'd ever been able to handle before. So in other words, my stress threshold had gone up significantly. And the reason I know this for sure, this isn't a story I share publicly very often, was that after that event in 2006, something far, far more financially serious happened to me in 2012. When a fraudster over here in Cyprus actually took a very significant six-figure sum of money, half of which was my pension and half of which was money saved for my son's education, and embezzled that money, and it has been returned. He was arrested in London in 2013, released on bail, and is at large. And I've had to deal with that, and I've dealt with it in a very different way than I would have dealt with the situation back in 2006, which much less serious that situation was, ended up with me in hospital. So I'm here to say that it's never the life circumstances. The severity of your life circumstance, that severity is not an indication of the extent to which you are going to feel stressed. It's how you react to that. So what made the difference? Well, these are the lifestyle tips that I want to share with you. And these have been quite transformational for me, actually. They really have. And I say a lot more about them in the book, Fit for Business, How to Deal with Stress and Create a Healthy Work-Life Balance. So I'm just going to give you the headlines here. And you might have heard of some of these before. You might be thinking, yeah, I know I'm supposed to drink 2 litres of water a day, Andrew. But do you do it? And the thing is, about being in the summer, when we get to the summer months, we're losing approximately 2 litres a day through dehydration alone. So if you're not replacing, at least replacing those 2 litres with pure water, your system is more of a stagnant pond than it is a flowing river. And that's going to have lots of consequences, not just for your ability to handle stress, but for your whole lifestyle, for the way you feel, for the way you sleep, for your irritability, for your weight, for your energy, for your vitality, everything. So it's really, really important. And it's harder than you think to drink 2 litres of water. There's a water chart in the book. And if you're listening to this webinar and you want to receive a free copy of the book, just drop me an email, andrew@andrewbridgewater.com, and I'll reply with an ebook version of the material there, so you can actually see it all in detail and put those steps into practice. The second step I call alkalizing to add vitality, and there's a component to this which I've got some stuff here. This is called wheatgrass, and it comes in a 200-gram pouch. This is a 200-gram pouch from Holland & Barrett. It costs about £9 in the UK. Very readily available. It's also available on Amazon. And you dissolve it in water. And this is almost a litre bottle. You start by dissolving a teaspoon of this in a litre, and then gradually build up to 2 teaspoons in a litre over the course of the next couple of weeks. And you do that twice a day. So you're drinking 2 litres of water with initially a teaspoon, then 2 teaspoons in each litre. And then watch the difference. And the transformation, slight edge in your health and well-being will be absolutely incredible. It really is good stuff. And this is the easiest way to alkalize your system. I'm not going to go into the science of this. I go into a lot more in the book, but the basic premise is that in order to be fit, healthy, optimally well, handle high levels of stress, the pH, power of hydrogen, in your blood needs to be at or around 7.365. And what this stuff is so good at is gently moving the pH up above the middle, slightly into the alkaline region. You've got to be very careful how you do this because it's carefully regulated, rather like body temperature. Don't go silly, do silly things. And the same goes with hydration. Don't drink vast amounts of water because you need a composition of essential salts, so no more than 2 to 3 litres a day. But the wheatgrass is really the easiest way to alkalise, and you know there's no complexity about that. Just do it, see what the results are in your body, and I think you'll be amazed. Another step, which I was talking to an exam group about this, and a group of exam students who are sitting their A levels in the next few weeks, is feed your brain healthy fats. Now, I got some fish oil supplement here. This is omega-3. These are about £2, £3 for 90 tablets, which will last you about 3 months, one a day. So that's 90 days. Healthy fats are what your brain needs. Your brain is 60% fat. And it's really, really important that you feed it the right fats in order for it not only to deal with stress, but to function properly, to enable you to get proper sleep, proper rest, not to be irritable, and also for you to just feel vibrant and alive. And if you're not feeding your brain the right fats, you're literally just missing an opportunity to optimize your well-being. And I'll say a lot more about that in the book too. The other thing that's really important, and this kind of does link to the 3 principles that I'm going to be talking about, is to quieten your mind on a regular basis. Now, the way that I do that is with a meditation MP3. I get mine from Deepak Chopra. It's about 50 minutes audio, and I just listen to it. I can listen to it on a train. Obviously, I wouldn't listen to it while I'm driving, but I can listen to it on the train. I can listen to it in the morning, in the evening. I tend to use mornings. That's why I work there. What quieting the mind does is it just frees up capacity. It frees up some space in your head to allow insights and natural wisdom to come through. And you will still find your mind racing. You'll find thoughts going through your mind, and you might think, oh, I'm no good at this meditation thing, I'll quit. But what's explained to me is that that's all about mental detoxing. When those thoughts are coming through, that's literally like you detoxing in the mind. And so you kind of expect that. And when they do that, you just let them go and you come back onto the mantra, listen to the audio. And it really is very, very calming and very powerful. And it's become a kind of positive addiction for me. I really enjoy doing it. And then the final point in these very simple lifestyle tips for dealing with stress is get some exercise, get some oxygen to your brain. And as I say, talking to a group of A-level students last week, I was saying to them, get out of your bedrooms, get some exercise, get that oxygen pumping around your system, reaching your brain. You'll sleep better, you'll be more fun to be around, you'll be less irritable, you'll be giving yourself some real relaxation away from the exam revision. The same goes for all of us in work. We really do need some exercise. There's some fantastic books out there. There's one called Younger Next Year, How to Turn Back Your Biological Clock. And the basic premise of that 300-page book is that your job for the rest of your life, if you don't want to go for a slow, decrepit decline into old age, is to get some exercise every day. And I love cycling out here in Cyprus. There's some beautiful hills just in front of me where I am now, and I can get out for half an hour. Went out this morning, and it just is such a great way to clear your head and feel vibrant and alive. So I totally recommend that. I'm just going to take a pause at this point and see if there are any questions. I can't actually see any questions in the chat. So please do put some questions or comments down there, and I'll respond to them as we go. So here's a bit more information. I was talking about the brain and healthy fats. As I said, your brain is 60% fat, so you need to feed it the right fats. And if you like oily fish like mackerel, sardines and salmon, that's terrific. But if you don't, this is your best alternative. Good quality omega-3 fish oil. And the other thing that works really well with this, which is also incidentally alkalizing, is cold-pressed extra virgin olive oil, drizzled on things like salads and other food. When you heat olive oil, it changes its molecular structure, so it's not so healthy. But when you drizzle it cold-pressed, the extra virgin olive oil version, onto your food, you're actually really giving yourself a dose of energy, not only alkalizing but very, very useful in terms of omega-3, because your brain's the only one you've got. There's so much talk about Alzheimer's these days. Looking after your brain is so important. And I'm convinced that with these simple steps alone, we could make a big dent into the Alzheimer's situation. So this really is important stuff, not just from a stress management point of view, but from an overall health point of view. So I talked about quietening the mind a little bit. As I say, this mindfulness or meditation, a lot of talk about mindfulness. Find a version that works for you, and just plug it in so that it becomes a positive and regular habit. You won't have to think about doing it. Getting out of the house and exercising, as I say, sends oxygen to your brain. Really, really important. And I see a lot of teenagers, particularly, who are permanently wired in. They've got gadgets plugged in, they've got a phone plugged in, they're watching videos. It's really important to turn off the electronics some of the time, because if you think about it, you're just bombarding your brain with information. And when I talk to students about exam time, I'm saying give yourself a rest by switching off the electronics to allow your mind to settle and to give yourself a chance of being able to retrieve some of the myriad of information that you've crammed into your brain during the exam revision season. It really is so important to be able to do that. So just again, taking a quick pause. Any further questions as we go? Okay, I can't see any questions, so I'm going to carry on. I want to talk a bit more about the psychology of personal experience. Now, I'm going to reference the work of Sydney Banks here. Sydney Banks, if you Google him, there's some really good information. His main website is sydneybanks.org. Sadly, he died in 2009, but his website has been retained pretty much unchanged from when he died. So it does look a bit outdated now, almost 10 years on. You don't realize how much websites have improved until you look at one that's 10 years old. But it's really good to go back to the source for this, because Sydney Banks had a very powerful insight. And his insight occurred when he was on a retreat with his wife. They were having some relationship challenges, and on a walk out with a psychologist, they were talking, the psychologist and Sid were talking about insecurity. And Sid was talking about his own insecurity. And the psychologist turned to him and he said, "Sid, you're not really insecure. You just think you are." Now, I don't think the psychologist really knew the power of what he was saying, because those few words triggered a whole series of insights for Sid Banks, which hung on for several days, which culminated in him talking about these principles of mind, consciousness, and thought. In other words, stress is never coming directly from the circumstances and situation of our lives. So where is it coming from? Well, it's actually coming from our thinking. Now, this is where Shakespeare mentions there's nothing good or bad, only thinking makes it so. And you might be thinking, well, okay, that's a clever play on words, William Shakespeare. But actually, it's a profound truth, because understanding how we create our experience of life is literally transformational. It has been for me. I made those lifestyle changes in 2007, 2008 that I talked to you about, to lose the weight initially, but then realizing not only that I've lost the weight, I was handling stress much better. But then it wasn't really until I came across the work of Sydney Banks, starting in about 2012, that I began to have a much bigger shift in my experience and my ability to handle stress. As I say, the problem that I alluded to a little bit earlier about the fraud, that's occurred since 2012. And the impact on me, yes, I felt sad, I felt down, I felt some stress, as any ordinary person would, but I didn't become totally wrapped up in that. It didn't run my life. It didn't sort of trigger me into another major relapse around depression. And rather, unfortunately, many of the psychologists and doctors I'd met back in 2006 who said to me that I was in danger of relapse any time if life circumstances got tough. And I remember thinking that's a really unhelpful thing to say, because it's a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy. None of us knows the circumstances or situations that we're going to end up in. And if we feel that we're vulnerable every time things don't go well in our life, it's a pretty poor prognosis. And I'm here to challenge that view that people who've had mental health issues before are vulnerable, because I think if you understand where your experience is really coming from, then you can be stronger than ever you were before. Rather like the place where you broke a bone is stronger than where it was before the break. I actually feel stronger. And also, I am totally convinced that my mental health issues will never return. And there are two components to that. One is understanding this experience of how I'm creating my experience of life. And the second is the simple lifestyle changes that I've made, which are kind of like a preventative maintenance program. I mean, let's face it, you wouldn't take your car on a long motorway journey having not serviced it for 2 years, check the oil, check the tyres, and just make sure it wasn't going to let you down. And I think there's a lot that we can do, not just for our mental health, but our physical health, which works very well in tandem together. And the more that we see and understand how our experience of life works, the less we actually have to do for things to work out well. Now, that's fantastically positive and optimistic, because instead of having to struggle and effort, and I got into this trap in my 40s. I wanted to become successful, so I struggled and efforted and went on every course I could find, read every personal development book I could find, walked on hot coals, you name it, I did it. But actually, I was looking in the wrong place. I thought somehow that I was broken, and if I just found the answer to fix myself, everything would work out well, I'd be happy and successful for the rest of my life. Well, I now realise that was a really quite a naive view. And now that I better understand how my experience works, how I create my experience through the principles of mind, consciousness, and thought, the less I'm finding I have to do for things to work out well. And as I say, that's a really wonderful set of truths that you can discover, because we always have access to this wisdom and insight. And, you know, even especially so in stressful situations, because as I was reflecting on talking to the sixth formers, the A-level students last week, I was thinking, generally, it'd be very hard to write 5 or 6 answers of several pages each in a 3-hour session. You just wouldn't be able to do it in the normal course of events in the day. You wouldn't have that adrenaline and that stress acting in your favor. But actually, when you learn to use stress and interpret the stress response, i.e. that sort of slightly increased heart rate, slightly increased breathing, that slight sweaty sensation, when you learn to interpret that as a positive, good thing in your life, then you can really use it for good. And I think that's so important. There have been lots of psychological studies done with groups of people, some of whom have been told about the power of the stress response to enable them to perform optimally, for example, in exams, and some of whom weren't given that information. And guess what? The people who were given the information outperformed those who weren't very significantly on every occasion. So we actually can excel ourselves in stressful situations as long as we're understanding the stress and using it well to act in our favor rather than to actually cripple us and cause us to have a head full of unhelpful thinking. So what I want to do is I want to open up to questions now. Now I'm looking at the chat and I'm not actually able to see any questions in here. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to open it up to email. So if you're listening to this webinar, I'd like you to email your questions right away, please, to andrew@andrewbridgewater.com. I'm logging into my email account now. And what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to respond to them by email, because for some reason, I'm not actually picking up any questions coming through on the webinar chat. And the whole purpose of this conversation was to be able to respond to your questions. So please, just straight away, if you can, just email your question or questions or comments to me at andrew@andrewbridgewater.com. Picking those up right now, and I'll come back to you straight away. In the meantime, I just want to answer a couple of questions that have already come through from people by email in advance of this session. One of which, and this is a regular question I get asked, is how does this wheatgrass taste? Well, I think the answer is, if you mix it down, it will taste a bit strange. It will taste slightly peppery, But what happens is, as your body adjusts and as you build up the strength, as I say, two teaspoons in a litre of water, you actually start to realise it tastes quite sweet. And I crave it to the point where actually I've started to go off some of the less healthy things. Now, that doesn't mean to say I don't like the odd piece of cake or the odd bit of plain chocolate. I love it. But I'm finding it's much easier to make healthy choices since I've been on the wheatgrass. And I've been consuming wheatgrass, anybody who knows me, for quite a few years now. And it's become a part of my life. It's so easy to take with you literally anywhere you go. So the whole sort of kind of wheatgrass thing, it's so easy to use. And I urge anybody to get hold of it. You can get it on Amazon, as I say. You can even get it in Aldi. And I think it's about £3 for 100 grams in Aldi. So that really is dirt cheap, and it'll last you about a month. The 200-gram pouches from Holland & Barrett will typically last about 2 months. So it's extremely cheap. So I'm still waiting for any questions to come through on the chat. I'm sorry, on the email. Just checking my emails now. I'll also check another account just to make sure that nothing's coming through there. Other questions that I typically get asked. What were the insights that I had around sport that kind of changed my life? Well, I'm usually a bit reticent to answer that question. So I was asked it by email just the other day. Because everybody will have their own insights, and I urge you to look at Sydney Banks's work, look at the videos, listen to some audios, let it wash over you. There's an excellent book by Michael Neal called The Inside Out Revolution, which initially opened me up to the 3 principles and this understanding of where personal experience is actually coming from. And everybody's insights are different. When you have your own insights, you'll remember them for life. They'll stay with you for life. It's not like kind of revise for an exam where you're trying to remember, right, what was mind again, what was consciousness again, what was thought again. You have these insights which kind of run right through that and don't require you to have to think about it intellectually. You kind of get it as a feeling, and it can be extremely powerful and very valuable when you get these insights yourself. So as I say, still looking for questions, not seeing any on the email yet. Please do send them through. Other sorts of questions that I get around stress, how to spot your early warning signs with stress. Well, all of us have got what I call a different crack of least resistance when it comes to experiencing stress. Now, stress, if you think of a rock formation and water flowing over the rocks, there's a crack somewhere in the rocks. The water will find it. The same is true with stress. And for some people, their crack of least resistance is physical, for some it's mental, it's emotional. Sometimes people get neck pains, they'll get neck ache, they'll get irritability, they get sleeping problems. And often it's a partner or loved one who will kind of point that out first, who will say, you're not quite yourself, what's going on? You've been waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning, you've been twitching a lot, what's happening, or you're overworking a lot at the moment. And actually getting used to spotting your own early warning signs is crucially important in terms of dealing with stress. So, watch out for those, pay attention to your body, listen to what it's saying to you, and respond accordingly, because forewarned is forearmed. When you get some sense of how stress is impacting you, then you can start to respond to it in a productive and positive way without it tipping into its kind of more sinister relatives of depression and anxiety. So if you'd like any more information on what I've been saying, please do go to my website at andrewbridgewater.com. I've got an up-and-coming group coaching program, which I'm just in the process of formulating at the moment. It's probably going to be 6 weeks, and it will be working with me in a small group format. We'll be doing a webinar once a week, followed by a Zoom call once a week, where we can get together as a community and really share our experiences of dealing with stress and moving through some of these life adjustments that I've been talking about, so you'll get coached and supported. And also, I run a 6-week coaching program. They're intensive 30-minute sessions. And all of that information is available on my website, andrewbridgewater.com. And if you go to andrewbridgewater.com/work with me, you'll see the very, very low cost coaching offer that I have. It won't be low cost forever. That's just an initial offer I'm making to work with people over a 6-week period for a very, very low cost. So I'm hoping that you'll be interested in having a look at that. And please do send your questions to andrew@andrewbridgewater.com. I commit to reply, and I very much look forward to hearing from you. Thanks for being on the call. Thanks for listening again to the recording, and I look forward to speaking to you soon. Bye for now.